What's going on, everybody? Welcome back on into the Space Cowboy Show. I'm your host, Ricardo, and it's officially the end of the 2025-2026 NFL season as the Seattle Seahawks defeat the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 60 to capture their second Lombardi trophy in franchise history, and doing so in dominant fashion. What a season from Seattle. Congratulations to them, and congratulations to DeMarcus Lawrence on getting his Super Bowl ring. Unfortunately, it was not with the Dallas Cowboys. But we're going to be talking about what the Cowboys can learn from the playoff teams that we've seen in this year's postseason and do another mock draft here this Monday. Before we dive into all that, if you haven't done so already, please hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, hit the notification bell. All of that helps out the channel and the YouTube algorithm, and I greatly appreciate the support, guys. You've been fantastic. And if you haven't known already, the show is powered by Creshman Media, so if you haven't checked out the other shows on Creshman Media, please be sure to do so after this show is over. Now, if you want to just skip to the mock draft, I completely understand. Timestamp should be right here, so you can skip to that portion of the video. But I wanted to sit down and talk about what the Cowboys can learn from what the teams did this year in the postseason to get to an NFC title game and hopefully hoist the Lombardi trophy. So when you look at this year's Final Four for the NFL season, who were they? Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, and New England. They all have things in common, and you could even go back and look at the past 5 seasons for the teams that made it to the Final Four. Not all of them are equal in terms of talent level, coaching staff, whatever the case may be, but they did have things that went their way that led them to that point, which if you compare them to the Cowboys haven't had. So what are those things? So when you look at the Cowboys, in the 3 playoff appearances that they had under Mike McCarthy, those recent ones, the 3 straight 12-5 seasons, where you had a total of 4 playoff games, the one time you made it to the divisional round and you lost, why were you losing in those games? Well, it's a couple of things, of course, but to make it as simple as possible, number one, your coaching staff didn't prepare your players and didn't do a good job of adjusting when things weren't going your way. That happens. Not everything's going to be perfect, and Mike McCarthy wasn't a guy that was able to adjust on the fly, and it showed in the postseason. Then you look at the offensive side of the ball. What has been a common thing with the Cowboys of recent in the postseason? They're unable to run the football effectively. So what does that do? You probably already know. It makes you one-dimensional because you're forced to rely on your passing game. So now these defensive coordinators can look at the weaknesses that Dak Prescott has and your passing game has. And now they're able to key on that. And this is where you start seeing those mistakes flare up. And now you are forced to play behind the 8 ball. Then you look at the defensive side of the ball. What has been a problem with the Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball at the playoffs? Well, big plays given up, being unable to stop the run and control the line of scrimmage. I know those are things that are like basic football, but when you really think about it, if you want to win a championship, you need all of these things to come together. And that hasn't for the Cowboys. Whether it be they're snake bitten, I just think the problem is when you look at how teams are built, I said this for the longest time. Teams are built from the top down, not the other way around. So in this case, you look at the Dallas Cowboys. Who's your general manager? Jerry Jones, right? You can talk about how Will McClay and Stephen Jones are a part of that think tank that they have for the front office and that roster construction. But ultimately, Jerry Jones has the final say in things. So that matriculates down to the head coach, which in this case now is Brian Schottenheimer, which we're seeing some changes in how things are going about coaching searches and more importantly, how they're building their staffs. But when you look at years past, clearly it feels like they just didn't have the right guy as the head coach. I'm not saying that Brian Schottenheimer is going to be the guy to lead the Cowboys to the promised land, but there are signs that things are different. And this isn't just me trying to cope or be super pessimistic just to put BS out there for you guys. But when you look at how they did their defensive coordinator search, it was the most in-depth defensive coordinator search they've ever had. And then they're bringing along these new guys onto the defensive staff that I think is going to help them in the long term, which when you compare it to how things have been in the past, they just haven't been good. Like you look at their past head coaches, Mike McCarthy, Jason Garrett, Wade Phillips, and you can even go in with Bill Parcells. And it really felt like they just failed to land the right coach, which ultimately will affect the type of personnel you're trying to utilize And whether you even want to look at the front office too for getting the personnel because you're not going into free agency and getting more players so that you're not fully reliant on the draft, that's a whole nother thing. But the thing is that at the end of the day, the Dallas Cowboys, in my personal opinion, for why they haven't gotten far, is because of how their football operation has been handled. And that lands on Jerry Jones. Look, I get it. He doesn't throw the football. I get it. He doesn't call the plays. Well, I guess not. But but my point is that we see these things. It's been a repetitive behavior, and it's why the Cowboys have gone so long without making it to the Final Four. So, what can they learn? The number one thing that I think they can learn from this is you need to go out and you need to go get some guys in free agency. You cannot sit on what you have now and say that it's good enough. You can't. That has been what the Cowboys have done for the longest time. There is no guarantee that some of the players you have on your roster are going to be good next season. There's no guarantee that they're going to be healthy. There's no guarantees in the NFL whatsoever. So what do you need to do? You need to prepare for those things. That's why you go out in free agency. That's why these teams go out in free agency and sign these players. They get better and also protect themselves from injury. Because not all your draft picks are going to hit. And unfortunately, the Cowboys look at the draft and they say, this is also an extension of free agency. That's pretty much what we've been seeing for the longest time, and it hasn't worked. And I think that that's what bothers me, is that they keep doing the same things, and it's not resulting in any different results. Right? So, to end this whole segment right here, I think that for the Cowboys, this is just me saying that while we're seeing them be more aggressive with trades, right? They went out and got a guy like George Pickens. They went out and got Quinnen Williams. They traded away Micah Parsons. That's cool. They went out and they did an extensive coaching search. And they landed on Christian Parker. And they're adding a couple guys, which feels like the Cowboys are letting this coaching staff do what they need to do. I think Brian Schottenheimer finally is doing what we've been wanting to see, is push to make this team what he wants it to be. But doesn't guarantee that's going to be anything. But the front office needs to do their part. If they don't, this whole thing's going to fall apart. So now let's go ahead and let's dive into this week's mock draft.
With the 12th pick, the Dallas Cowboys select
Colton Hood, cornerback, Tennessee. Look, I've talked about him before. This is a guy that you need to be familiar with if you're a Cowboys fan, because he's going to start shooting up draft boards. In this particular mock draft, the guys that you would want at linebacker at that pick 12 weren't there. The edges weren't there. Some of my favorite cornerbacks like Mansour Delane weren't there. So the way I look at it is, if you're unable to trade down and you have to stick and pick, Colton Hood's most likely the best option you have. You know, I look at a guy like TJ Parker. Would I take him at 12? Probably not. I think you could probably get him at 20 still. But that is going to have to be a conversation. But if it were up to me, and this is how the draft played out with how it did in this particular mock draft, with you losing out on all these guys, I would trade down. But the reason I'm not trading down is because I want to see what we would do if we stuck and picked, which in this case, I wouldn't be shocked. Again, I talked about Colton Hood. He's a really good player, especially with the intangibles that he brings. I understand that he had very limited playing time, but with what we're seeing, especially with how people are talking about him and how good he's been looking of recent, especially with people looking at his film and things like that, you're going to see him shoot up draft boards. I talked about who he could possibly be a top 15 pick in the upcoming draft. So don't be surprised if the Cowboys were to go with the cornerback like him or with another player. But again, this is a guy you need to keep an eye out on.
with the 20th pick, the Dallas Cowboys select
Anthony Hill Jr., linebacker, Texas. Now, this was a guy I've took before in a previous mock draft, and I know a lot of people feel a bit weird on him. I've seen Cowboys fans complain about a guy like Anthony Hill Jr. at 20, but to be honest with you, I think he would fit very well with Dallas. And like I said in the previous mock draft that we did when we took him, I think that him and DeMarvion Overshown would fit very well together. And I think you look at a guy that's going to have fantastic sideline to sideline speed. And I understand that he's not some of the top guys in this draft class, but I think he can be a very damn good player for you in that linebacker room. Now, again, if it were up to me, I would look to trade down even at pick 20. Now, you did have a guy like TJ Parker on the board, and I felt like maybe you would go with him again here. But I really think with where the Dallas Cowboys are at, if you're in this position where all the edges are gone that are at the top tier and you want to settle with a guy like TJ Parker, that's fine. I'm not saying that TJ Parker is a bad player, but like I said in the previous mock draft when we took him, TJ Parker's a guy where it's going to take him possibly a season or two to really get his feet under him because he doesn't have those pass rush moves fully developed yet. A guy like Anthony Hill Jr., I think you can plug and play him and he'll be a solid linebacker for you. But that is where when you don't have any day two picks, it's going to make that decision a whole lot harder for the Cowboys. But I want to be clear, just because you take these two players, I don't think you come out of this looking like, oh my God, they really effed up this draft. I don't think that in the slightest. I think that this is a solid mock draft for the Cowboys if this is how it lands because of where these players are starting to move up and down draft boards. And I think that as Cowboys fans, we really have to understand that we have to look at who they're talking with. We have to look at guys that you might not be familiar with. I know a lot of people love the linebackers out of Ohio State, right? They like some of these edge rushers, but I don't think they're going to be there. Now, that doesn't mean they won't be there because trust me, if those guys are there, you take them and you just go with it. But the question also becomes, and this is something I wanted to talk about, is would the Cowboys possibly consider taking an offensive player with one of these draft picks? And I say that because we have to look at this offensive line. Do the Cowboys look at taking another offensive lineman in the first round for their right tackle position? Maybe. If a guy like Love from Notre Dame falls to you at 12, do you take a guy like him if you can't figure out what to do with Javonte Williams? These are questions to be had. And I think that, again, this Cowboys team needs a lot of help defensively, and this is what scares me. Going back to what I talked about with what they do in free agency. If they fail to address the defensive side of the ball effectively in free agency, they might get jumped for one of these players that falls down to them, right? Like if you're in a situation where a David Bailey is coming down the draft board and you're like, oh my God, we didn't go after an edge. Maybe he'll fall to us and then we get jumped at pick 11 for him because they know the Cowboys need an edge, right? That's a problem. Then again, the Cowboys need help everywhere on the defensive side of the ball. What am I saying? But my point is that the Cowboys need to do their job in free agency. That way, we're not going to the draft saying to ourselves, okay, you know what? If we don't get this guy, we're screwed. And also the pressure on these two draft picks, if you still keep them, who knows if the Cowboys trade them for already established players. But if the Dallas Cowboys make these selections, these two dudes that you're going to be bringing in here are going to have a whole lot of pressure on them. A whole lot to succeed. So there's that. Either way, these are the two guys that we took in this particular mock draft. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't done so already, please, again, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, hit the notification bell. That'd be greatly appreciated. I'm going to see you guys in the next one, and we'll talk a bit more about what to see moving forward from this team as we get more news as to what they're looking to do. We already heard some news about George Pickens. I'm going to wait a little bit before we talk about that again because I already talked about how the Cowboys should not be tagging George Pickens and why that's not a good idea, so I don't want to repeat myself. But again, we'll talk about that when we get there. So guys, again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Goodbye.